Today, we're going to be talking about Dialdo, who is coming to War of the Visions this week. We'll talk about his kit, his stats, do some comparisons, talk about equipment, and even take a sneak peek at the Japanese meta. So if you don't know whether or not you want to be pulling for him this Wednesday, this video will hopefully help you out. Dialdo is a spear-wielding tank, and much in the vein of Snow, Alphonse, and later on in the Dark Element Raph, he has innate hate that allows him to take the enemy's eyes as soon as the battle begins. He is a magic scaling unit, which means his attacks will hit against the spirit stat, but don't think he's here to carry your team on offense, because his job is to be an absolute unit on defense and can counter many attack types and compositions. So let's talk about how Dialdo is going to be able to do this by checking out our scouting reports. First up, we're going to be talking about damage, and damage is not Dialdo's strongest area, but he does have a few things going for him. So let's pull up the card now. He attacks with both magic and pierce attacks. While having no penetration for either types, there are still many units that do have weaknesses to these two attack types. He also has magic killer and magic damage up from his weapon and kit respectively, and has access to resistance break on the red mage sub, which will give him a big spirit break and some chaining potential, which will also remove re-raise. So otherwise, Dialdo is going to have a tough time dealing significant damage. With only 10% spirit penetration on his kit, you're going to find that against high spirit targets, his damage will really suffer. He also just has a low magic stat and no barrier break. So basically, Dialdo has one job, and he does it really well, so let's just talk about that. I hope you're enjoying the Final Fantasy XI background, by the way. I'm still messing around with how exactly I want to get my videos, but, you know, we'll get there. So Dialdo, for durability, has pretty much everything checked on the scouting report. From a stats standpoint, he looks really great. Aside from his accuracy, he has one of the highest HP stats in the game, and a healthy amount of innate defense as well, once you consider his passive and his active abilities. He also has multiple ways to raise his spirit, but can also access Shell on his kit for magic damage reduction, as well as a magic barrier on the Kododama wielder sub-job. So you can build him, depending on what you see in the meta, to counter some magic attacks or to counter physical. Whatever way you want to tailor him, he's going to be able to do that. But by default, he's going to be very bulky against most damage types, because he has a very high single target resistance stat. So he gets 15% from a passive, 10% from survival vest, 20% more from his limit burst, and that's before we even factor in vision cards for both bestowed and party effects. There's also a self-healing side to Dialdo's kit with a healing power buff that's on a 30% damage absorb skill, and he has regen on his limit burst as well. You might be thinking that he's lacking AoE resistance, but he does have 8% from his spear, and he has 20% on his magic barrier skill on the Kododama wielder sub job. So for good measure, Dialdo is also strong against chaining with an 80% elemental chain resistance on his hate buff. He also reduces the effect of debuffs by 50% with his second TP skill. So what that means is, if he has a 40% defense break on him, it would actually be 20%. If it was a 38% elemental imperil, it would actually be 19%. So that's a really strong skill. That's very new to us. That's a very good tanking skill, because those elemental imperils, for example, with Satya, that's what made her so good. One of the things that made her so important as a damage dealer for fire. So Dialdo's regular counter will also increase his HP by 20%, but he also has an activated counter that we've seen recently, that once he uses a TP skill, he gets the counter, and the counter has a 50% chance to reduce physical damage by 30%. But if you're seeing a lot of magic users in the meta, then you could actually switch to the red mage counter, which is the magic reflex, and you'll still get the ability counter if you want it as well. And if you thought I was done, then you're wrong, because Dialdo also has a sub-job skill that increases his HP by 20%, and then his earth and lightning resistances by 25%, and that happens for both him and his allies. So he has so many different ways that he can build and that he can set up to take on a variety of opponents. He really is a very strong tank. Moving along to utility, Dialdo does have limited utility, but what he does have is excellent. So this includes an AoE full dispel and a 100% counter chance reduction on his main kit. His bread and butter attack will also inflict confusion, and he starts off with 50% of his max HP, which means he won't be concerned about AP management. On his red mage sub job, he has access to resistance break for that spirit break and re-raise, dispel, but also the chain, as we already talked about. And because he's tanking enemies, they're going to be close to him, which means he actually will have a chance of using that. On his Kodadama sub-job, he has the 100% hit attack, as well as some other solid magic attack skills and some mobility increases. Just keep in mind that 3 of his skills have cast times, and Dialdo does not have any cast time reduction. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, consider giving it a like and commenting down below what you think about Dialdo so far, because those things will help out my metrics and help my channel grow, and I really appreciate that support. Okay, so on to the cons. It's funny, I always ask for your support and then I say something negative. You know, yeah, maybe it's on purpose. But either way, he has a few cons. There's no re-raise or courage for him, of course. You know, we have a unit that can now give him courage, although we have units that can give him re-raise too. But either way, he can't supply those by himself. He really wants to get off quite a few buffs. Quite a few, and therefore Dispel is going to be a big weakness of his. If you can bring in somebody with a Dispel, then you can strip a lot of what makes him tanky. He also has very low accuracy, and you're not necessarily going to be able to rely on the 100% hit, but also you're not asking him to deal a lot of damage. So really what you would like is for him to be able to hit with his other skills to maybe debuff people or put confusion on people, but that's not going to happen because his accuracy is very low and you're not likely to be building for it. We can pull up the comparison chart here, and I'm not going to do a massive in-depth comparison between Raf and Dialdo here, but if you would like to see one, you can go over to JB79's video on that very topic. I'll put the link for that in the description. It's an awesome video. But what I will say is that both Raf and Dialdo are great tanks. They're both a step up from Alphonse. They have great starting AP, which is just a straight up advantage over tanks like Alphonse, Snow, Joom, and King Mont. So ultimately, if you are kind of wondering about Dialdo and Raf, I would give Raf the edge between both of them purely because she's in the dark element, and I think that's just a better place to be most of the time. But Dialdo will not disappoint you if you decide to pull for him. Moving along, we're going to talk about some of the equipment that Dialdo has, and we'll start with his TMR, which is what we would call a stat stick in War of the Visions. And the ability is solid too. Reducing the bravery of your opponent is going to reduce their physical damage and their chance for physical counters, but Dialdo has a ton of buffs he'd rather use. So what we're really seeing here is that this is an accessory with 7 agility on it, which is insane. It's a really good TMR. We also have the Void Spear, which you'll be able to farm for this Wednesday. It's a spear that can be built for magic or attack stat and has boosts for both Dialdo's magic and pierce attack. The exclusive effect gives human killer and AoE resistance, making it both an offensive and defensive tool for him, and it also works for Lancers, Trick Lancers, and Dragoons. So if you have any old units that have those main jobs and you want to make them a little bit more bulky and survivable, then giving them some AoE resistance from this lance is maybe a good option. You will definitely just want to build a magic version for Dialdo and be done with it. And now it's time to talk about the JP meta and see how much Dialdo is being used, and I've put it up to top 50 here. We can see on attack usage, 224 teams. He's recently gone up a huge spike here. Why might that be? Well, Melnia just came out. So Melnia is a 100 cost Earth Gunner, and that has coincided with him seeing more play. Before that, he was seeing about 144, 148. There was a dip here where he was at 89. Same thing on defense. He was at 40, 78 a couple days ago, but then now 171. So lots of people trying him out with Melnia, and I think that she is quite good. So that's really nice to see. But if you're wondering how that compares, if we look at Sephiroth, for example, 317, 505 on defense. He's just seeing way more use. Bradley has had a recent surge, but even then, before the surge, 190, now 291. Pretty good stuff. So people are using Bradley more than they're using Dialdo. And then when we look at Raf, she's the highest of all. She's got 350 there, and then 597 on the other side. So we really are in a dark meta right now in JP, but there are other big players like Earth. So coming back to Dialdo, we can see kind of what people are actually running with him, and it is going to be a little bit skewed because Melnia just came out. So we can see that most of the teams here on offense and defense both feature Melnia, but also we can see some other teams here. So Queen Masherie with Bradley and Dialdo is going to be a very, very solid team. But we also see that Velis as more dedicated healer for this team is also going to be very effective. Now, this puts a lot of pressure on Bradley to be the carry, and this is why Bradley is so key in this case, because he's just so freaking good. Like, honestly. But we also see that the Lightning Alaya strike, this like kind of the wedding dress Alaya, is being used in the team down there. And also on the other side for defense, there's a Rolgia. I mean, that's not super common, but some people are using it. And otherwise, again, you know, just a lot of people are looking into seeing how viable Melnia is going to be in the current meta. Just some closing thoughts before we get to the verdict. And I had a question from somebody that said, do you need King Bradley to pull for Dialdo? And that's a really tough question, because I think King Bradley is the strongest unit in the entire game currently, and, you know, probably in the future as well. Maybe, you know, Raph gets up there too, but I think, of course, he's going to make Dialdo better. Like, it's just unquestionable. However, I do think that a solid Earth team will get a lot of use out of Dialdo as well. It basically means that without Bradley, Earth is just going to be comparable to some other elements. So, for example, I think that Fire can get a lot done with the current units that it has. Earth is going to be in a similar place without Bradley. Bradley is what makes it that extra layer and takes it to maybe even a broken place. It's what Sephiroth does for Dark currently, and what, when paired with Raph, what will happen is we'll see what happens with Dialdo and Bradley, where you have that super high octane damage dealer protected. So yes, I think that Bradley is a really important piece, but it doesn't mean that you can't be competitive without it. And usually grabbing tanks is a very good idea because they have a lot of staying power in games. You can use them in all sorts of compositions. You can use them in traps, which are not necessarily even Earth teams, so using with Velas and another carry. So I think there is a reason to pull for Dialdo if you don't have Bradley. Definitely if you have a strong Earth account otherwise, then you would pull for him. And maybe if you're thinking, well, I don't have a lot of Earth units and maybe I'll use them as a trap, well, I would actually wait for the rerun in that case, or maybe go for Raph instead. Another thing I wanted to bring up is that one of my Discord members, Hitsu, mentioned that he has a suspicion that the next Glex unit will be Wind, and that's a pretty good guess, as we often see Glex units that will counter strong JP units. So that's just something to keep in mind, that hopefully we'll be getting some relief in terms of the Bradley Dialdo meta that's coming in for a little bit here. And with that said, we are at the verdict, and I'll be honest with you, I think that a lot of players should pull for Dialdo. He's definitely a top tier unit. I think he's a meta changer once you have all the supporting cast for him, and in the future, he gets even stronger with Melnia and Lightning Alaya. So I do think that he's a good pickup for a lot of people, especially if you have Bradley. If you don't have him, then your reason to pull for him dips a little bit, but he's still a very good unit. But because Dialdo's going to rerun, and he actually reran in JP just last week, and I have a video on that if you want to see what the banners that were available for him, you can just go pick him up later. So something to keep in mind. But then looking forward, you know, you'll have to pull for Melnia as well. So it really depends on kind of what your Visior looks like, and you'll have to make that decision for yourself. But I don't think people will be disappointed pulling for Dialdo. I think he is a very strong unit, and I would definitely recommend that a lot of players pull for him. I would actually pull for Dialdo myself, but I'm out of Visior right now, so I'm going to have to wait for a rerun like a total loser. I hope this video was useful for you, and if it was, you can let me know down in the comments below, and let me know if you're planning on pulling for Dialdo and why. What makes you want to pull for him specifically? I love hearing the rationale of different players, because maybe you got something that I don't know, you know something I don't know, you want to share that information. But otherwise, I'll see you all soon enough in another video. Thank you so much for watching this one.